In a gloomy, foreboding mansion, a family gathered around the dinner table. Suddenly, a young man named Yuri rose from his seat and asked his father for a private conversation. Without warning, Yuri made a shocking request. He asked to be banished from the household. His father and the rest of the family were stunned, while his brother burst into laughter, reminding Yuri of their prestigious lineage. The Lugsouths were among the most renowned noble families in the nation, directly tied to the royal bloodline. But Yuri was already aware of this. He had foreseen the family's downfall, knowing they would soon face total ruin. This was the grim fate of Saint Quest, a popular game that had now become Yuri's reality. The world around him mirrored the game he once played obsessively. Turns out he had been reincarnated as Yuri Lugsouth, the game's final boss. Bro played too hard, he became an NPC. This character had pretended to be the protagonist's loyal ally, only to betray them in the end, earning the title of the most despised character in the game. However, the main storyline was still 5 years away. At this point, the game was only beginning, with Yuri's betrayal set to occur a year after the story's conclusion. Ultimately, the Lugsouth family's secret plot to overthrow the nation was exposed, branding them as a family of masterminds. As a result, they were all sentenced to death except for Yuri's little sister. Yuri's thoughts drifted back to his brother, Marco, the second son, who continued to laugh at his absurd request. Marco assured Yuri that as long as he remained under the family's protection, he would never have to worry about money and could live a stable, privileged life. However, he doubted that someone as slow-witted as Yuri could grasp this. But Yuri could only look at Marco with sympathy, knowing the cruel fate awaiting him. In the end, Marco would meet a brutal death accompanied by subpar dialogue that made it painfully obvious the game developers didn't even bother with his lines. At that moment, the eldest daughter, Miranda, scoffed and dismissed the situation entirely. She declared that everything would be just fine. After all, they had no need for a pathetic ape like Yuri. In her eyes, he was nothing more than a useless liability to the family. Yuri turned his gaze toward his sister, who was tearing into him without hesitation, but all he could see was the ironic and humiliating fate that awaited her. One day she would be stripped of her dignity, begging for her life while groveling before her captor, reduced to nothing more than a squealing pig. As for Yuri, or rather, the character he had reincarnated as, his own end was just as pitiful. He would be struck down after a failed attempt to assassinate Emelina, the saint. His miserable demise had even led players to dub the game Gloomy Quest rather than Saint Quest. Just then, the head of the household, Balin, rose from his seat, his voice dark and ominous as he demanded an explanation from Yuri. The room instantly tensed. Both Marco and Miranda fell silent, shifting uncomfortably at the sight of their father's growing rage. Balin Lugsouth wasn't just the younger brother of the king, he was the man who handled all the royal family's dirty work, including assassinations. Worse still, he was the mastermind behind the nation's eventual downfall. Yuri suspected that even though he was Balin's son, that wouldn't make him immune to his wrath. If he provoked the man, he was as good as dead. Carefully weighing his words, Yuri crafted a response that wouldn't get him instantly obliterated. He told Balin that he wished to explore the outside world to gain valuable knowledge and insight. His experiences beyond their household would ultimately benefit their family, allowing him to contribute to its development and future prosperity. Okay, Miss Universe. Upon hearing Yuri's response, Balin's fury exploded like never before. How could a worthless laggard like him ever contribute to the family? As Balin loomed over Yuri like an unshakable tower, the eldest son Not simply let out a tired sigh, already convinced that Yuri was done for. Then, with an eerie calmness, Balin reached toward Yuri, his voice laced with unsettling amusement. He admitted that Yuri's request was something he never expected to hear. As Balin's massive palm drew closer, Yuri braced himself for the worst. This was the same man who had crushed the skulls of subordinates who dared to defy him. Yuri knew that his fate was practically sealed. There was no escaping it. But instead of delivering a brutal end, Balin placed a firm hand on Yuri's shoulder and gave it a solid tap. With a smirk, he commended Yuri's resolve. In fact, he was so impressed that he decided to grant Yuri a portion of his land. Poor kid must be pissed his pants. Balin informed Yuri that he would have to learn how to become a full-fledged lord, a statement that filled Yuri with gratitude. As he stepped away from the dinner table, he let out a quiet sigh of relief. This was exactly the kind of response he expected from the mastermind of an evil family. Meanwhile, Sasha, the youngest sibling, remained seated, visibly troubled by her brother's decision. Unable to shake her concern, she hurried after Yuri, expressing her worries about him setting out on his own at such a young age. As the second daughter of the Lugsouth family, Sasha was, as far as Yuri knew, the only genuinely kind-hearted member among them. In a house plagued with cold and strained relationships, she was like a breath of fresh air. Despite her concerns, Sasha understood that this was Yuri's choice to make, so she refrained from trying to change his mind. Instead, she handed him a pair of crescent blades, protective charms meant to aid him on his journey. Yuri accepted her gift, though he couldn't ignore the irony of the gesture. Even the kindest member of the Lugsouth family still had ties to a lineage of criminals. Later that night, as a butler poured Balin a glass of wine, he cautiously suggested that the head of the house reconsider his decision to grant Yuri some land. However, Balin dismissed the concern without a second thought, merely commenting on the wine's poor taste. He mused that even the finest wines could be disappointing, and some were bound to fall short of expectations. As he casually poured the rest onto the floor, he revealed that he had long intended to get rid of Yuri. However, he never anticipated that the boy would willingly leave on his own. As they say, never tell them your next move. If Yuri managed to survive on the land he was given, there would still be plenty of ways for Balin to exploit him in the future. The next day, Yuri read a letter from his father, officially appointing him as the lord of the village of Alf. The weight of his decision began to settle in, and his concerns only grew when he realized the kind of land he had been given. Alf was barren, with poor soil and scarce resources, making it an undesirable target for invaders. Rebuilding the village would require starting from scratch, and before anything else, he needed to gather skilled individuals to help him. However, he suspected that most of the talented people nearby were already in his father's service. He had no idea what Balin's true intentions were, but knowing him, he wouldn't keep all of his subordinates too close. With no other viable option, Yuri exhaled sharply and accepted the challenge ahead. With little choice, Yuri went to a slave shop where the owner greeted him with familiarity. The man spoke highly of Balin, which only left Yuri feeling embarrassed. In this world, slaves were bound by magical contracts, ensuring that they could never betray their master. It was far from an honorable system, but at least it meant he wouldn't have to worry about treachery. Since it was a perfectly legal practice, he decided not to dwell on its morality. Whatever floats your boat, my boy. The shop owner, seemingly eager to assist, suggested a set of slaves specifically selected for their useful skills. He then led Yuri to a cell containing 3 individuals. Though the owner presented himself as helpful and trustworthy, he privately doubted that the young noble would be able to judge their true worth. However, unbeknownst to him, Yuri saw through the facade and was well aware that the man harbored his own reservations about him. Determined to make his own judgment, Yuri informed the owner that he would assess the slaves himself. In St. Quest, players were granted various abilities, and the character Yuri Lugsouth, whom he had reincarnated as, possessed an exceptionally rare skill. Activating his appraisal eye, Yuri analyzed the status of those before him. To his surprise, he was able to use this ability, despite it not existing in the original game. However, it was a perfect tool for his situation, so he intended to make full use of it. As he assessed the slaves, he found that their stats were significantly higher than he had anticipated. But as he examined one of the female slaves, he made an unsettling discovery. She was already under contract. Digging deeper, he realized that all 3 slaves belonged to Balin. A wave of shock washed over Yuri as he grasped the implications. His father had anticipated this move, securing contracts with the very slaves Yuri might have purchased. That meant they could already be working as informants for Balin at this very moment. Any hope of gaining loyal subordinates was crushed. It wasn't unexpected, given that Balin was the leader of a family of schemers, but it was still frustrating. Yuri also suspected that the slave shop owner was secretly aligned with his father. The man maintained a pleasant smile as he asked if any of the slaves interested Yuri, but instead of answering, Yuri slammed his palm against the counter. He declared that none of them met his standards before excusing himself, leaving the owner in shock. As Yuri walked away, the man couldn't help but wonder if the third son had figured out the rigged scheme Balin had orchestrated. Wandering through the bustling streets, Yuri mulled over his predicament. He was in a tight spot, struggling to find anyone who wasn't under his father's influence. His options were dwindling. He briefly considered forming a hero's party, as their ties to Balin would likely be minimal. However, if he made a single misstep, he could end up on a one-way path to destruction, just like in the game. Shaking his head, he realized that plan wasn't foolproof either. He needed people completely unconnected to both Balin and the hero's party, but such individuals would be nearly impossible to find. Just as frustration settled in, a thought struck him. His eyes widened. He knew someone. Fi. Fi was a beastfolk girl who had been enslaved after being driven from her homeland when her mother was killed. In this world, beastfolk were despised, and as an orphan she had no means of survival. In the game's storyline, her fate was grim. Her corpse was later discovered by the hero, an event that made him question the nation's corrupt practices. She had been a tragic character, doomed to die in a side event. Damn, is everyone in here supposed to die? It was a brutal story, one that made the game's world feel even darker. But now, in this reality, Yuri saw things differently. A smirk tugged at his lips, knowing this was an opportunity. Fi was a rare recruit with no ties to either the hero's party or his family. If he could find her before fate took its course, she would be the perfect addition to his ranks. But first, He had to track her down. As Yuri wandered through the village, he overheard a group of men discussing a beastfolk hunt taking place nearby. Elsewhere, 2 men were in the middle of subduing a beastfolk girl, tying her up to prevent her escape. She struggled fiercely, but her strength was no match for her captors. One of them remarked that she was attractive, while the other dismissed her as worthless due to her race. With disgust, he claimed that beastfolk were nothing more than filthy subhuman creatures appealing only to depraved individuals. Hearing this, the first man reluctantly agreed, his interest quickly fading. Dude got cockblocked real good. Desperate to break free, the beastfolk girl suddenly bit the man restraining her. Enraged, he retaliated by viciously stomping on her, justifying his brutality by claiming she might carry diseases. His companion, equally irritated, urged him to finish up and sell her. However, before they could take things any further, Yuri stepped forward, addressing the girl by name. The men, now furious at the interference, turned to confront him, demanding to know who he was. Unbothered, Yuri noted the irony of finding exactly who he was looking for so quickly. A rare stroke of luck in his otherwise frustrating day. One of the men suddenly recognized Yuri as the 3rd son of the Lugsouth family. However, instead of reacting with fear or respect, they burst into laughter. His reputation preceded him, as he was known as nothing more than a failure. Emboldened by their low opinion of him, the 2 men made a reckless decision. Seeing an opportunity, they charged at Yuri, planning to capture him and demand a hefty ransom. Despite their confidence, Yuri remained composed. He knew that his character's strength lay in deceiving others into underestimating him. Realizing he had no choice, he sighed inwardly before activating his unique stealth skill. As the attackers lunged, he moved swiftly, slipping into their blind spots and effortlessly disarming them. The men initially believed they had caught him, until they realized their weapons had vanished. Before they could react, Yuri pressed his crescent blades against their necks, sending a chilling wave of fear through them. His stealth skill was a combat technique designed to target an opponent's vulnerabilities with precise, deadly accuracy. Ironically, it was the very skill that had given him the most trouble during the final boss fight in the game. Now the tables had turned. The men, trembling, finally understood that Yuri was far from the failure they had mocked. One of them, now desperate, pleaded for mercy. Yuri granted it under one condition: they were to leave Fi alone. With that, the 2 men wasted no time, scrambling to escape. With the men gone, Fi finally allowed herself to breathe, turning to Yuri with gratitude. She shuddered at the thought of what could have happened if he hadn't stepped in. Yuri listened to her speak, quietly observing her demeanor. Something about her made him think she might be a good person. To be sure, he activated his appraisal eye, scanning her status. The results confirmed what he had hoped for. Fi had no existing contract. A satisfied smile formed on his lips. She had no ties to the hero's party or his father. Just as he had predicted, she was one of the few individuals in this town he could safely recruit. Without warning, Yuri firmly placed a hand on Fi's shoulder, his grip confident. He informed her that in exchange for rescuing her, he had a favor to ask. His words caught her off guard, and confusion flickered across her face as he explained that he had been searching for someone like her. However, Fi's mind jumped to the worst possible conclusion. Panic took over as she recoiled, horrified by the implication. Was he one of those depraved humans with a twisted interest in beastfolk? Her body trembled at the thought. After all, a hole is a hole, right? Unfazed by her reaction, Yuri quickly clarified his intentions. He had only one demand: to get her properly cleaned up. Then, with a sudden shift in tone, a smirk crept onto his face. His voice lowered, carrying an almost sinister edge as he added that he also wanted her to become his maid. Fi could only stare, stunned by the absurdity of it all. Meanwhile, without realizing it, Yuri Lugsouth had just taken his first step toward becoming a lord. That night, Fi was given the royal treatment, receiving a thorough cleaning and being dressed up by a team of servants. She was bathed, measured for new clothing, and properly groomed. Later, Yuri checked in on her, assessing her progress. Fi, still confused, questioned the purpose behind all of this. Yuri clarified that it was all in preparation for her new role, as she was to become his personal maid. As Yuri observed, he overheard some maids gossiping about his apparent fondness for beastfolk, which irritated him slightly. Meanwhile, Fi found the entire situation unbelievable. She remarked that the Lugsouth family was truly incredible for hiring someone as insignificant as her. There were countless individuals who would give anything for an opportunity like this, people who were considered normal, far more deserving than a mere beastfolk like herself. However, Yuri remained unfazed by her self-deprecation. His reasoning for choosing her was simple. She was the only one who met his expectations. In Yuri's mind, his father was an incredibly suspicious man, someone who had planted spies throughout the town to monitor his every move. Given this, he had to be extremely careful when selecting people he could trust. However, Fi was different. She was originally meant to die in an unrelated incident, meaning there was no way she could be one of Balin's pawns. This assured Yuri that she posed no risk of betrayal, making her the perfect candidate for his plans. Despite his confidence, Fi remained uncertain. She asked what Yuri truly wanted from her and, more importantly, why he needed her of all people. Memories of years of mistreatment suddenly flashed through her mind. No one had ever stood up for her. Not until Yuri came along. Still doubting her worth, she hesitantly questioned if he really needed her. However, before the conversation could continue, a maid entered the room, announcing that all preparations were complete. Turning to Fi, Yuri gave her the first task of her new position, which was putting on her uniform. When she saw it, awe filled her eyes. The uniform was crafted specifically for her, tailored with precision and care. 10 minutes later, she returned, now fully dressed in her maid outfit. Of course, we have to give a moment for the melons. Yuri inquired whether she liked it, and to his surprise, Fi was overjoyed. Overcome with emotion, she hugged him, expressing her deep gratitude for his kindness. However, as she remained in his embrace, a sudden silence fell between them. Sensing a shift in her demeanor, Yuri asked if something was wrong. In that moment, Fi's mind wandered to the horrors beastfolk often endured. How people took advantage of them, treating them as mere objects to use for pleasure. Yet standing here now, she couldn't help but feel that Yuri was different. Once Fi was fully dressed, Yuri announced that it was time to take care of business. She questioned his intentions, but he simply responded with a sinister grin, implying that it was something he couldn't openly discuss. The next day, Yuri led Fi to a dilapidated mansion tucked away in the slums of the village. Standing in the shadows, he assessed the location, convinced that his father wouldn't know about this place due to its isolation. As he became lost in thought, Fi was consumed by her own growing anxiety. The state of the mansion, along with scattered objects she interpreted as clues, made her suspect that Yuri had sinister motives. Perhaps he was one of those depraved nobles who preyed on beastfolk. Their thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Instinctively, Yuri became defensive. Moments later, two young boys, ragged and malnourished, stepped into the dim light, claiming the mansion as their territory. Yuri remained unimpressed, quickly realizing that the place had become a refuge for homeless children. Without hesitation, he informed them that he had business to discuss and ordered them to leave. One of the boys, the older of the two, refused to comply. He dismissed Yuri as nothing more than a spoiled noble and made it clear that he wouldn't take orders from him. Meanwhile, the younger boy, sensing the tension, nervously tried to defuse the situation. Apologizing on behalf of his brother, he explained that they hadn't eaten in 2 days, which had made him irritable. Growing impatient, Yuri issued a warning. If they refused to leave, he would personally see to it that they were removed by any means necessary. He didn't care how, but he would make it happen. Fi, witnessing this, felt her unease intensify. In her eyes, Yuri wasn't just cruel to beastfolk. He also treated orphans as if they were disposable. The older boy, despite his fear, defiantly stood his ground. He declared that no matter what Yuri did, he would find a way to win against him. Then, 10 minutes later, Yuri returned with a bundle of freshly bought meat skewers from the butcher. Without a word, he handed them over to the boys, offering the food in exchange for their departure. Desperate and starving, they eagerly accepted. Fi, puzzled by the unexpected gesture, questioned his reasoning. Yuri, however, didn't provide an explanation. Instead, he simply instructed the boys to keep watch over the mansion while he spoke with Fi. With that, everything was settled, and there would be no more interruptions. Once they were alone, Fi grew increasingly anxious, convinced that Yuri had deliberately stationed the boys outside to cut off her escape routes. Believing she had no time to waste, she quickly formulated a plan to flee. However, before she could act, Yuri suddenly grabbed her arm, demanding to know where she was going. Without warning, he cornered her against the wall, pinning her arms in place. He reassured her that he would be quick about it, but his vague words only fueled Fi's worst fears. A cold sweat ran down her back as her mind raced with explicit scenarios, convinced that Yuri intended to do something indecent to her. At this point, she felt there was no way out. Resigned to her fate, she reluctantly asked him to at least be gentle. In response, Yuri simply adjusted his hair, casually assuring her that he wouldn't hurt her. Bracing herself for what was about to happen, Fi prepared for the worst. However, rather than anything inappropriate, Yuri activated his appraisal ability, analyzing her hidden potential. As expected, her stats were low, but he was surprised to find that she possessed agility and a dagger skill. This made her a suitable candidate for an assassin. The only question now was whether she could be trusted not to betray him. After finishing his assessment, Yuri nonchalantly informed her that they were done. Fi was bewildered. Nothing lewd had happened. When she voiced her confusion, Yuri was just as puzzled, questioning what exactly had been going through her mind. Embarrassed, Fi called him an idiot, while Yuri, unimpressed, warned her to watch her mouth. Sis lost her shot. Later, at a weapon shop in a distant city, Fi finally learned the real reason behind Yuri's actions. He had merely been assessing her latent abilities. This left her questioning why he had chosen such an eerie, abandoned mansion for the task, instead of doing it in the comfort of his home. Yuri then explained that his appraisal ability was his secret weapon, and if his father ever discovered it, it would cause trouble. Using it recklessly in the mansion was out of the question. Fi, growing curious, asked if he and his father were on bad terms. Without hesitation, Yuri confirmed it. As they browsed the shop, Yuri examined a well-crafted dagger, deciding that it was a good fit. He handed it to Fi, informing her that when he had appraised her, he had seen that she had a dagger skill. Fi was taken aback as she had never realized she possessed any combat abilities. Yuri explained that most people naturally have at least one or two skills. Overcome with emotion, Fi reflected on how she had always been labeled as useless. Yet now, for the first time, she felt like she had something of value. This realization warmed her heart. Excited, she eagerly raised the dagger, swinging it through the air in an attempt to showcase her so-called skills. However, her efforts were met with little reaction as Yuri paid her no mind and instead focused on paying for the weapon. On their way back home, Fi clutched the dagger close to her chest, vowing to treasure it. Unmoved, Yuri reminded her not to get too attached as it was merely a disposable tool. Upon their return to the village, the young boy from the abandoned mansion approached them, enthusiastically calling Yuri, "Meet Big Bro." Recognizing the child as the brat from earlier, Yuri was unimpressed. The boy, unbothered, fired back that Yuri was a brat himself. "Touché, boy." The ragged boy then passed along a message. Someone was looking for Yuri. When asked who it was, the boy revealed that it was Lady Emelina, the saint. The revelation left Fi in shock. Lady Emelina was a highly regarded figure associated with the church. She wielded holy magic and would eventually join the hero's party. However, Yuri, possessing knowledge of the original storyline, recognized her as a dangerous individual, one who would ultimately be responsible for his death. Doubt crept in, and he asked the boy if he was certain about the identity of the person searching for him. The boy, however, insisted that there was no mistake. This development troubled Yuri deeply. In the original plot, he had never interacted with Emelina. If she or any other hero party members became involved with him now, it could mean that the storyline was beginning to follow its destined course. And if that were the case, his fate would be sealed. He realized that if he wanted to survive, he needed to avoid the main character of the original game at all costs. If he were to be recruited into the hero's party, it would mean his ultimate downfall. Lost in thought, he mumbled to himself, contemplating his next move. The boy watching him remarked that he was acting strangely. Yuri was pulled back to reality when Fi suddenly spoke, expressing her excitement. To her, the fact that someone as important as Lady Emelina was seeking him out was proof that her master was extraordinary. However, Yuri had no interest in basking in the attention. Without wasting another second, he abruptly declared that they needed to leave immediately, leaving Fi utterly confused. Elsewhere, people gathered eagerly in the streets, hoping to catch a glimpse of Saint Emelina. As expected, she was as popular as ever. With her beauty and charm, it was only natural that the crowd was enamored by her presence. Among them, a man enthusiastically waved, requesting a handshake. Initially reserved, Emelina eventually relented, indulging the people's requests. She shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and performed small gestures to satisfy their admiration. However, amidst the growing spectacle, one of Emelina's assistants quietly reminded her to stay focused on their main objective, finding Yuri. If she continued to linger, nightfall would arrive before she even realized it. Irritated by the interruption, Emelina sharply reminded her assistant that as servants of the church, it was also their duty to fulfill the wishes of the people. Better not mess with this diva's airtime. Addressing the crowd, Emelina then announced that she had heard of a boy named Yuri from the Lugsouth family, a young noble who had recently rescued a beast girl from a group of hooligans. At that moment, her assistant recalled a similar event from Emelina's past, when she had personally intervened to save illegally imprisoned slaves. At the mention of this, Emelina's expression darkened, and she swiftly snapped at her assistant, emphasizing that Yuri was still just a child, not an adult. As she spoke, a soft smile crossed her lips at the thought of the noble third son. She began to entertain the possibility that he was one of the prophesied figures destined to vanquish evil, one who had received divine guidance, much like the saint, the hero, or the great sage. Convinced of this idea, she declared that as the saintess, she had decided to make Yuri her partner. Her assistant, having witnessed her impulsive tendencies before, could already foresee where this was heading. It was clear that Saint Emelina was about to act recklessly once again. Elsewhere, Yuri expressed his gratitude to the little boy for the valuable tip about the saint. The boy dismissed the thanks, reminding Yuri that he was simply returning the favor after being treated to meat earlier. However, with a nervous tone, the boy then proposed a deal. He would continue providing useful information if Yuri promised to keep supplying him with plenty of meat in the future. Yuri found it amusing how easily the boy had become obsessed with meat but wasted no time in breaking the bad news. He informed the boy that there would be no more meat from him moving forward. The boy immediately reacted with distress, panicking as he begged to know if he had done something wrong. Desperate to make amends, he even offered to apologize in any way necessary, going as far as to say he would lick Yuri's shoes if needed. Unsettled by the dramatic display, Yuri simply told him to stop. Collapsing to his knees in despair, the boy pleaded not to be abandoned, revealing that everyone in the slums was on the brink of starvation. Until Yuri had come along, they had never eaten properly. Seeing Yuri remain silent, Fi urged him to at least respond. Without hesitation, Yuri then revealed that he planned to leave town the next day, making it impossible for him to continue feeding the boy. Fi was caught off guard by this sudden announcement and questioned him, but Yuri offered no explanation, merely instructing her to come with him. The situation was becoming unpredictable. His father's actions were uncertain, and on top of that, the saint was now searching for him. Without another word, Yuri turned away from Fi and the boy, stating that he had no time to waste feeding a bunch of hungry brats. The boy was left stunned by his apparent cruelty, while Fi couldn't help but feel bad for him. However, just as guilt started creeping in, Yuri turned back and informed the boy that while he wouldn't be giving him meat anymore, he would show him a good hunting ground instead. The boy's eyes lit up with newfound hope as Yuri instructed him to gather all the other children. Wasting no time, the boy sprinted off to summon the rest of the homeless kids in the area. Watching this, Fi was taken aback, especially since Yuri had just insisted that he was in a hurry. Yuri merely explained that it would be troublesome if the children ended up resenting him for abandoning them completely. Later, Yuri led the group of kids into a secluded forest. It was an ideal location, hidden away and filled with low-level monsters, perfect for even inexperienced children to hunt successfully. The boy was surprised, admitting he had never known such a place existed. Without hesitation, Yuri instructed them to start gathering food for their dinner. Excitement surged through the children, and in an instant they scattered, eager to catch something edible. As they gradually managed to take down some creatures, Yuri observed with satisfaction, pleased that they were quickly getting the hang of it. At that moment, Fi approached him and asked if she could join in on the hunt. Yuri nodded, and with excitement she dashed deeper into the forest. Watching her go, Yuri thought to himself that at the very least, none of the children would be starving anytime soon. Now, if he could just avoid Saint Emelina, everything would proceed according to his plan. However, to his shock, an unfamiliar voice suddenly spoke. A mysterious girl approached, casually commenting on how lively the place seemed. Stepping into the light, she curiously asked if there was some sort of event happening. Yuri's body froze in place as he recognized the figure standing before him. It was none other than Saint Emelina. Panic gripped him as he frantically wondered how she had managed to find him. With an unsettling smile, Emelina inquired whether he was Yuri Lugsouth. Yuri, still trembling from shock, realized that she had already caught up with him. If things continued like this, she might ask him to join her party, just as the events in the game dictated. Desperate to avoid that fate, he decided to play dumb, feigning ignorance and claiming he had no idea who Yuri Lugsouth was. For a moment, Emelina appeared concerned, wondering if she had approached the wrong person. Determined to confirm her suspicions, she immediately got to work, questioning every boy in the forest, asking if any of them were Yuri. Watching her methodically interrogate each one, Yuri's anxiety spiked. If she intended to go through every male in the area, it was only a matter of time before she found him. Knowing this, he realized he needed to leave before she uncovered the truth. Just as he was about to slip away, Emelina suddenly turned to him and asked what they were doing in the forest. With a sigh, Yuri explained that he had shown the kids a good hunting ground, ensuring they wouldn't go hungry anymore. Orphans, after all, had little chance of making a living in town. Emelina was momentarily taken aback by his words. Meanwhile, Yuri seized the opportunity to excuse himself, claiming he was busy and needed to leave. However, before he could step away, Emelina suddenly grasped his hand, knelt before him, and declared that he was truly admirable. She showered him with praise, stating that aside from Yuri Lugsouth, a noble and kind gentleman like him was also helping impoverished children. Yuri could only stand there awkwardly as she clung to his hand, utterly confused by her dramatic reaction. Quickly regaining his composure, Yuri pulled his hand away, insisting once again that he had to leave. Just as it seemed like he had successfully evaded trouble, Fi suddenly called out to him, unintentionally revealing his identity to Emelina. She excitedly ran toward him, proudly displaying a giant rabbit she had caught. Before Emelina could fully process what she had just heard, Yuri wasted no time. Without hesitation, he scooped Fi into his arms and bolted. As he sprinted away, he hastily tried to cover up the slip, insisting that Fi had not addressed him as Master Yuri. Glancing back at the saint, he noticed her expression had shifted. She looked more serious and solemn than ever. However, instead of reacting with suspicion or anger, Emelina merely smiled, agreeing that she must have misheard. Yuri exhaled in relief, realizing that Emelina was in fact stupid enough to accept his absurd excuse. Even so, he knew he couldn't take any more chances. He needed to leave this place as soon as possible before he slipped up again. Just then, Emelina crouched down, readying herself to sprint. In an instant, she dashed forward at an incredible speed, cutting off Yuri's path and demanding to know where he was headed. Yuri was stunned, and he couldn't believe she had managed to close such a distance in a single move. His suspicions were confirmed. This girl was an absolute monster. But before he could figure out how to deal with her, a sudden scream rang out from the distance. Turning toward the source, they spotted a massive beast towering over the children, its hunger evident as it prepared to devour them. Yuri immediately recognized it as the guardian of the forest, while Emelina, clearly alarmed, questioned why it had appeared. It quickly dawned on Yuri that something was off. Normally, only low-level creatures roamed this hunting ground, making it safe for the kids. However, rare and powerful monsters tended to emerge whenever a high-status character entered the area. He realized that Emelina's overwhelming strength must have drawn the guardian out. Meanwhile, amidst the chaos, one of the children tripped while fleeing, leaving him vulnerable. The beast, licking its hand in anticipation, prepared to strike. Without hesitation, Emelina sprang into action, charging straight at the creature to intercept it. She fearlessly challenged the guardian, daring it to fight her instead of preying on the helpless child. Watching her leap into battle, Fi couldn't help but be impressed. Yuri, however, remained focused on their escape, urging Fi to take the chance to flee while Emelina was keeping the guardian occupied. To his frustration, Fi refused to leave the others behind. As the battle unfolded, Yuri explained that Emelina, despite being a healer, was an utterly broken character with monstrous strength. Determined to leave no matter what, Yuri insisted once again that he and Fi had to go. However, before they could make their escape, Emelina had already dealt with the guardian, mercilessly beating it into submission. She then turned her attention to the child, checking if he was unharmed. The boy, still shaken, expressed his gratitude, while Emelina simply smiled, relieved that he was safe. Fi remained in awe, struggling to process how Emelina had taken down such a massive creature on her own. Meanwhile, Yuri wasted no time grabbing Fi's hand and leading her away from the forest, confident that Emelina would be fine, just as he had expected. But just as they were leaving, Emelina suddenly sensed something was wrong. Before she could fully grasp the situation, another guardian emerged from the shadows and launched a surprise attack, striking her hard on the side. Blood sprayed in all directions as she suffered a severe wound. The child beside her panicked, pointing out that she was bleeding. "Oh, really? Didn't catch that, lil bro." Emelina struggled to regain her composure while the new guardian advanced, its massive form looming over them, saliva dripping from its jaws. The boy trembled in terror at the sight of the monstrous beast. Emelina, still reeling from her injury, acknowledged that things had taken a turn for the worse. She was in no condition to cast a healing spell in time, leaving their survival in serious jeopardy. As the guardian raised its enormous paw, preparing to deliver a crushing blow, the boy screamed desperately for help. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, a hidden assassination skill was activated, sending a dagger flying straight into the guardian's eye. Yuri suddenly flipped through the air, landing gracefully on the ground as the monster roared in pain. Blood gushed from its wounded eye, yet it remained standing, its fury only intensifying. Yuri frowned, realizing his attack hadn't been enough to finish the beast off. Without wasting time, he turned to Emelina, asking if she had finished healing herself, since he wanted her to deliver the final blow. Gathering her strength, Emelina stood up and unleashed a powerful holy magic spell called the Thousand Cross. A blinding explosion erupted from her scepter. Racing toward the guardian with overwhelming force, Emelina's magic struck with an overwhelming force, completely obliterating the guardian within seconds. The sheer power behind her spell left nothing behind, as if the creature had never existed. As the dust settled, she stood tall, her presence commanding and unwavering. The children and Fi remained frozen in place, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. Even Yuri, despite his prior knowledge of Emelina's terrifying abilities, found himself momentarily stunned. He had always been aware of her immense power, but witnessing it firsthand was a completely different experience. There was no doubt about it. This woman was terrifying. With the battle over, Emelina turned her attention to Yuri, approaching him with an air of confidence. She acknowledged his assistance, offering her gratitude. However, Yuri dismissed her words without much thought, acting as though his involvement had been insignificant. His priority was to leave the area as soon as possible, distancing himself from any further trouble. Just as he was about to turn away, Emelina abruptly grabbed his wrist, stopping him in his tracks. She assured him that it didn't matter whether or not he was Yuri Lugsouth. She was perfectly fine with it. The words caused an immediate reaction in Yuri, his body tensing as he processed her statement. A deep sense of unease settled in his chest, his mind already racing ahead to predict what was coming next. As he had feared, Emelina soon revealed her true intention. She had been searching for someone to join the hero's party, and it had become clear that she had set her sights on him. The realization sent a wave of dread through Yuri, his instincts screaming at him to escape. Accepting such an offer would only lead to disaster. Then, in an act that caught even himself off guard, Yuri did something completely out of line. He placed his hand directly on Emelina's melons, grabbing it without warning. When your intrusive thoughts betray you, Emelina was utterly stunned, unable to process what had just happened, but Yuri was just as shocked, bewildered by his own actions. A surge of rage erupted from Emelina as she demanded an explanation. Panic seized Yuri as he hastily attempted to defend himself, claiming that the act had not been intentional. His words did little to calm the situation. If anything, the intensity of Emelina's fury only escalated. Fi, having witnessed everything, casually remarked that boys seem to have a particular fondness for large things. This only made things worse, much to Yuri's frustration. He shot her a glare, warning her to stay out of it. Emelina, unwilling to let the matter drop, pressed him further. She demanded the truth, questioning whether his actions had been an accident. However, rather than offering an apology or an excuse, Yuri made a decision that could only be described as reckless. Instead of denying it, he confirmed it outright. He had done it on purpose. We love an accountable king. Emelina was more furious than ever, seething as she accused Yuri of being worse than trash. However, Yuri simply laughed at her outburst, completely unfazed by her anger and telling her she could say whatever she wanted. Fi, who had been quietly observing the situation, instinctively covered her chest, now fully convinced that Yuri was nothing more than a pervert. Still fuming, Emelina declared that she shouldn't have even considered inviting Yuri to her party. Her frustration quickly escalated into a dramatic outburst, as she shouted that she would simply seek out the real Yuri Lugsouth and invite him instead. Hearing this, Yuri panicked, attempting to tell her that he was the real Yuri. However, a sudden realization struck him. If word got out that a noble from the prestigious Lugsouth family had groped the saint, it could spell disaster for him. The mere thought of Balin hearing about it was enough to send chills down his spine. Determined, Emelina stormed out of the forest, announcing that she had made up her mind. She would personally visit the Lugsouth estate and extend the invitation there. At that moment, Yuri stiffened, his entire body tensing at the looming threat of exposure. A few hours later, Yuri returned to the mansion with only one goal in mind: escape. He hurriedly packed his belongings, urging Fi to do the same. There was no time to waste. They had to leave before the saint discovered his true identity. As their carriage sped away from the estate, Yuri finally felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had made it out safely, at least for now. Despite the sense of security that came with their successful escape, Fi could not shake the unease lingering in her mind. She worried about the children they had left behind, uncertain of whether they would be able to manage on their own. Yuri, however, dismissed the concern, admitting that he had no real answer. Yet, as he reflected on the situation, a strange sense of familiarity nagged at him. He was sure he had seen those kids somewhere before, though they didn't seem to play any significant role in the game's main storyline. There was probably no reason to dwell on it. More importantly, he reassured himself that he had already addressed the orphan's starvation problem. Unbeknownst to him, he had just prevented a major catastrophe: the Great Insurrection of the Orphans, an event that was supposed to unfold in a few years. At this moment, however, he remained completely unaware of the far-reaching impact of his actions. Instead, his mind was preoccupied with a more pressing issue: how to move forward. He had narrowly escaped Emelina's invitation, but that didn't mean they were in the clear yet. As he sat deep in thought, Fi watched him carefully, noticing that he was unconsciously mumbling to himself. His mind was racing, determined to crush every possible death flag and free himself from his predetermined path to ruin. Then, without warning, Yuri suddenly rose from his seat, his resolve solidified. Turning to Fi, he announced that it was time to throw themselves fully into their new plans. Their next journey was about to begin, leading them into uncharted territory. That's the end at chapter 3.4. Please look at the pinned comment about information for the next part.